And where social media has excelled is stuff that would be lost in the noise are suddenly brought to the forefront. It could be something, it could be a social issue, it could be something else, and social brings it to the top. And oftentimes, the accelerant in that process is going to be a video snippet. But if social can use a snippet to get people to go back and actually hear the story itself, that becomes a really, really big deal. And so if it may be social video can actually lead to the real story, and whether it's audio or video, I see social as a means to an end. Okay, not an end in itself.
From cave drawings to family histories to stories around the fire, humans crave order among chaos, connection amid isolation. So we tell stories. Our mission at the Storytellers Network is to bring the art of story to the masses. Whether you're in marketing, you're an entrepreneur, or you're developing your own personal brand, telling your story effectively can make the difference between celebrating milestones and collecting unemployment. The Storytellers Network strives to help storytellers tell their stories so you can learn from the best. Now, your host, the inbound evangelist himself, Dan Moyle.
And welcome to the Storytellers Network podcast. I'm glad you're joining me today. In this episode, we hear from the CEO and co-founder of a Boston startup called WePlayed. He's been in sales and marketing. He was the CMO of a video marketing company called Pixability, where he was also like the head of sales and marketing at one point, both. Just an incredible story. And that's where actually we crossed paths and I got to know him better. He's also been an advisor to a group of media, advertising, and marketing technology companies. He's a self-professed geek. He believes in the power of story, especially video, and he's been doing it for a while now. Today, my friend Rob Ciampa shares with the Storytellers Network his storytelling craft, his successes and stumbles, in other words, his story. And it is incredible. As we dig deeper into today's conversation, just a quick reminder to find us online at thestorytellersnetwork.com for more episodes, for how to contact me, and for other resources to help you better tell your story. And if you like what I'm doing here, please leave a review. It helps me reach new storytellers. Now, let's get to the stories. So, listeners are in for a treat. Rob, welcome to the show, man.
Dan, it's great to be here. Anytime I spend with you, it makes my life so much better.
It's been far too long.
It has. And when we get you back to Boston, we're going to make sure that we're out eating and having some oysters again. So don't forget about me.
Oh man, I won't. So you just answered my usual first question. You're in Boston, and I talked about it in the intro. You're at a Boston startup, so you're actually in Boston then, yeah?
I am in Boston. I am in if you can see behind me, I am in a building that was built in the late 1800s. And a portion of that building was cordoned off. It became what's called the Sports Innovation Lab. And, that direction is the brand new, it's compared to the old one. It's TD Garden where the Bruins and the Celtics play. And I catch my occasional YouTube concert there. So we're in a really great part of Boston. Although it's an old part of town, there are cranes everywhere, and it's exciting. And as you know, the food's great nearby too.
So Boston's full of stories. So as a storyteller, you've got to have a ton of material there, and just to take in, yeah.
Dan, this is a PG-13 show, and some of the stories that I have from Boston, can't be broadcast. I think it's a great question. As a Bostonian, and I've lived outside of Boston too, but I grew up in a town called Medford, Massachusetts, which is a couple towns outside of Boston. And we learned the storytelling because a notable thing about Medford, Massachusetts, back in the late 1700s, there was this dude who lived here in the North End called Paul Revere. And apparently we heard that one night he hopped on his horse to drive out to Lexington and Concord because some enemy insurgents were here in Boston. And so we grew up, with the story of Paul Revere. But it's, the irony of that story, it's, all of us know Paul Revere's ride. Oftentimes we don't know that there were two other riders that night, and Paul Revere actually got captured. Okay, but that never really makes it. But, what's interesting is we think the stories that we tell now matter, but Paul Revere's story was lost. And it was Longfellow. who wrote Paul. They basically wrote the poem of Paul Revere's Ride that brought it back to life. So because of his story, Paul Revere's story came back to life, and here I am, hundreds of years later, repeating it all. So it gives us. And the thing about stories, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but I'm getting goosebumps. Stories make us. It's an emotional thing, and that's why when we get there with friends or we tell things like this, it hits a different part of whether it's the brain or the heart, and that makes it wonderful. Am I getting too sappy, Dan?
No, man, this is perfect. So
I love this stuff.
Man, so do I. This the passion behind your voice, and I love story, and just like we're just gonna wing it. What the hell? So you mentioned friends, stories, and friends, and getting goosebumps. You do a ton of not. I don't want to say events, but like you get people together, you connect, you cook. So let's talk a little bit about storytelling and cooking. We'll get into like the marketing side of things, and you've been doing this forever. You're an expert, as I mentioned in the intro. You've done sales and marketing and all this stuff and technology for a bunch of companies. But let's get down to the base of storytelling, Rob. When you get together and cook, when you and Laura, your wife, cook, and you guys cook for friends and with friends, what does that mean to you?
Oh, happy to share that. And the foundation for it actually began. All my grandparents came from Italy. And growing up in an Italian American household, it's your meals. I know it's stereotypical, but our Christmas dinner would start at 11 in the morning, and it would run until 8 o'clock at night. So if you didn't have great stories to tell, that much time together with family members would result in a gunfight. So early on, we got into the whole story thing. But later on, as I grew up, I ended up in the restaurant business. And, in Boston, we have the old Italian district, which is called the North End. North End's a great place. We talked about Paul Revere earlier. His house actually still remains in the North End. And the Old North Church is also in the North End. And Dan, we'll have a quiz later about how many lanterns were hung. Remember, 1 if I land, 2 if I see. And if you answer that right, you'll get a special prize. But what was great what I learned early on in my life was that, when you're waiting on people and you're serving, and I started off as a busboy, ended up as a waiter, and, I worked in the kitchen. But, it was amazing to see generations of, because the restaurant I worked at was a very, very historic restaurant, had been there since 1917. And for me as a server, meeting people, understanding who they were, and oftentimes they would tell their stories. And it was not unusual for me to wait on 4 generations of a family, which was absolutely amazing. And then how I connected to them, because they didn't just come in for the Italian food, to give them the story of the food and what type of food they want, what type of wine. And that sort of triggered my interest in food, not so much, to satisfy the palate, but there's a whole story aspect of food. Fast forward years later, I had the opportunity to meet an amazing woman, my wife, Laura, who you know, and she shared a similar passion. So what we started doing over time is we'd have this, we suffer from insatiable curiosity. And, we love to cook, and both of us have, done training and cooking and everything else. We go on these little journeys where it's like, okay, we're experimenting with food from this region of France. This month is all about Gascony. Or we talk about, we love the cooking of the Basque region of Spain. But what we would do is we would have all these themed parties at home, and we would invite friends, and we'd tell the story about the cuisine. But what would happen at these parties, people would also tell their stories related to either the cuisine or what it meant to them. And this is why our parties, unfortunately, and this is why we're not inviting you. Our parties usually start at our dinner parties will start at say 6 o'clock. And a lot of them, because the stories haven't stopped, will go to 2 o'clock in the morning. And now that I'm 39 again, it's, staying up until that late can hurt. But it's a great part, and it actually brings people together, and it just makes it's what we're all about.
It really is, isn't it? I mean, those stories are just unbelievable. One of our other guests in season 3 here was Billy Wong, talking about wanting to end racism one story at a time.
I love it.
Just beautiful, right? Like, we get these ideas of these vast groups of people or whatever, and if you can hone in on one story from the quote those people, it personalizes things, it humanizes others, and and then you get that through that diversity of stories. So yeah, anyway, I love stories.
This idea, you're hitting something very, very important, because let's think about what happens these days. We get messages from all over the place. The thing about a story sticks. And a story, it's not like if somebody tells you something great, but when they contextualize it as a story, there's something in the brain that makes it stick. And if it sticks, it's going to force your subconscious to think about it. That's why, when you're talking about, somebody approaching racism in a story, if we're gonna, hopefully eradicate racism, then we have the ability, if we keep on hitting people with stuff that's meaningful and it sticks, and the subconscious chews on it, that's a great way to do things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yeah, isn't that cool? Yeah, I love it. So I know that one of your dinner parties you had this really cool idea about sharing stories about songs. We've talked about this, and I want to give the listeners this idea about, like, if you love story and you want to be inspired by the stories, do this thing. So tell me about your 3 songs dinner.
All right. So we think stories are addictive. Let's recall the time where we've every single, whether it's you or the listeners, and hello to the listeners, and thank you for letting me bore you. How often have we had that damn song in our head? And, oh, geez, how am I going to get the song out of my head? And there's always something. But if we look back on our past, and as we grow and as our tastes change, it's amazing to see how our musical tastes have changed. And, and this is true for everybody. And I'd say the joy of having children over the years, and I've had some very, very musical kids, is they keep me listening to cool new stuff. But we get together with some friends, and I think this is my friend Richard had introduced me to the concept, Richard and Jennifer, and they're just 2 amazing individuals. And they said, okay, when we all get together, or maybe it was Brad. Okay, if they're listening to this, I want to make sure I don't get anybody mad at me. But it was bring 3 songs, and we started doing this on our own as well. And so everybody who was attending, we carved out some time. We said, each of you bring 3 songs. And so we had access to an online music system, so we could say what the songs were. But a song from a different phase of your life. And so they play one song, and they would explain why it was meaningful to them. In other words, they told the story around the song in that portion of their life. Then the next song, and you could see distinct changes, in life. And we all knew each other, for years. We loved one another, but we saw into the soul of everybody, and because they told their story, it made us even closer to them. And it was an exciting thing for us to do, and I highly recommend it. And it worked out really, really well.
And what were your 3 songs?
I had, surprisingly, I had a Led Zeppelin song, How Many More Times, during my somewhat crazy youth. And then what we had is, excuse me. Yes. Okay, I'll move this in a second. So Dan, in a typical co-working space, we're gonna do this live if you don't mind. So we're gonna change positions here. It's
Not
a Friday
problem.
afternoon. Why is anybody here? So to answer the question, we had How Many More Times, and I just found, and Led Zeppelin has its own story, and an incredible group. And when you look at the story of Led Zeppelin, that was great. I also had I had a song by the Dandy Warhols, Bohemian, you're Bohemian too, and that was great. And this shocked everybody. I had a Glenn Campbell song. And they're like, okay, Rob, Glenn Campbell, what's wrong with you? And what people don't realize, and there was a whole Glenn Campbell story. Glenn Campbell was a session musician. So unlike a lot of stars, Glenn Campbell was great. And so the Led Zeppelin song really represented my wild part of youth. The Dandy Warhols it's a lot of edgy alternative, which a lot of people stay away from. But the Glenn Campbell song was Try a Little Kindness. And for me, it's, as much as we're living in a crazy world right now, there's a lot more kindness to give. And I got exposed to Glenn Campbell as a child, and I've watched the Glenn Campbell show. But what we found is that, it turned out to be something that resonated in my adulthood. So introduced to me as a child and everything else. So we're going to walk.
I love it.
First for the podcast. I'm not sure what's happened here, but we have a good signal within here.
Very good.
Try to find a room with some decent light.
So I think it's Glenn Campbell. Correct? You may know this. Glenn Campbell did a song, "I Got a Gal in Kalamazoo."
Right? And I know Kalamazoo is going to be very, very important to you.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm from the Kalamazoo area, and there's great stories there. So whenever anybody says, "Wait, Kalamazoo," I've heard of that. Like I think it's the Glenn Miller Orchestra that did that song that made it famous. So anyway,
yeah, it may be worth mentioning, and this is also good. One of the things that we often forget, and I'm just sitting down here. We get some good light.
Yeah, looks good.
The other room looked way cooler though. So, but, it's a co-working thing. So let's not forget that stories, and especially let me get some of the light behind us here, is that, a lot of us, and my mother's older, and a lot of people, the way and it's tough getting old, I'm sure, and my mother's in her 80s, but, when we get her to talk about her stories, it brings her back, and the memories come back, and, it brings happiness. So, as you talk to, with your listeners, for those of you, your parents, not only get them to tell their stories, but also record their stories, because that's the family history, and we pass that down to our children.
It's funny you mentioned that, Rob, because my grandfather's coming up from South Carolina. They're from the area too, originally, but he lives down there now with one of my aunts, and he's coming up this summer, later this month, I guess it is. And I've secured a nice camera, a microphone, and we're going to sit down for a few hours. I'm just going to let him talk, because that is so important. Hearing those stories, keeping that history alive is so important.
Yeah, it's good for them, and it's really, really good for the family.
Yeah.
We can't do enough of that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm looking forward to that. So how does that personal storytelling, the songs, the the dinners, the cooking, how does that translate into a professional aspect of storytelling? Have you purposefully made that all part of your life, or does it just kind of transfer for you naturally?
That's a great question. For me, it's always been part of my life, and maybe I'm just lucky. And how it's translated professionally. So we live in a very, very crowded market, and candidly, I think, Dan, you've heard some of my very strong opinions. It's like, oh my God, it's can somebody run a great marketing campaign? Can we do something that's interesting? And so a lot of my best campaigns, and the credit goes to my team. I think it's more because I'm a story guy, and I get the crew to tell stories. That things get interesting. And stories can often be, in one of the ways to amplify a story is going to be with metaphors. And, people don't realize that, it's the plot line. And one of the things that, I was involved in a technology company and I thought, if you don't mind, I'll share the story with you. Mm-hmm. I was involved in a technology company. We were doing what were called high performance messaging switches for Wall Street. And it was like really geeky stuff. And the trading floors wanted their data really, really fast. And so I had taken over as the head of marketing. I was brought in. And so there's this big trade show in New York. It's like, oh, we've got the trade show, and all the dudes in the suits are going to be there. And, everybody who's at the booth is going to have a suit. It's, oh my God, it's the Borg. And I want to die. I said, no, we're not doing that. These are all people. And we want to, based on the average age of the people there, a lot of them have been exposed to some of the craziness from the 1960s. And so we felt that what we were doing in the story that we crafted, it's like, we can say, well, we're doing high performance message feeds with these many interfaces and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no. We're talking about the revolution. Okay. And we're radicals, and it's a revolution. And it was the 1960s. So I turned to my CEO, Bob Kramer, who's a great guy. And, and it's important. He was my boss at the time. He encouraged creativity. And so we're going in jeans. We're doing tie-dye T-shirts. It was the 50th anniversary of the peace sign at the time. Everybody thinks the peace sign was like the 60s. It's actually older than that. I think it was the late 50s. And we had these cool shirts. We had everybody, in 60s gear. We had everybody dressed up in 60s garb. That we had our support staff in tie-dyes, but we hired other actors to come in various garb, and we broke the rules. We had like live 60s music, and everybody wanted to come to our booth. And all of a sudden, everybody wanted the shirts. But as it came in, they started sharing their stories about, of course, we were from a professional perspective, we were doing qualification. But a lot of people, we asked them, why did you want the shirt? And they ended up telling their stories about the 1960s. And so we had an 8,000% year-over-year improvement of financial performance from that show. So it was great. And again, it was all tied to stories.
All built on story. I love that, man. That's incredible. So you've been doing that kind of stuff since the mid 90s, marketing, business development, sales, this kind of thing. Has story, so it sounds like story's always been a part of that for you then, right?
Yeah.
So what about video storytelling? How does that play a part in what you do? And why did you lean to it? Because season 3 is all about video storytellers. And so we know each other I know you from your time at Pixability, and I've got to know you beyond that, obviously, but where does video play into that for you and your story, Rob?
So let's face it. If we look at human beings, and we can listen to a great story, and that's important. Personally, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I just like it. Probably too many. I mix it up to see how people are telling their stories. And I also, with video in particular, there's so much great video out there. But a great story with video also encompasses audio. So it's not like it's audio or video. And you've heard me say before, it's not one or the other, it's both. And what video done well allows you to basically deliver the story much, much better. And what for me, many years ago, when I transferred from, because historically I'm an engineer. And when I went into marketing, I kind of brought that, not that I'm creative, people get accused engineers of being creative. It's like, I started saying, well, why don't we, this is in the 90s. Am I dating myself? I ended up hiring a couple of boutique firms out of New York who are dabbling in video marketing for products. It's like, and there wasn't a YouTube. There wasn't any type of streaming. We had the CD, and we did video on CD, not DVD either. And what we found is the impact of video on selling product was actually pretty big, because it wasn't just, we told the story of why we did the product, why the product was important now, and how it fit into the marketplace, but more importantly, the story of what it can do for them. So sometimes the process of inspiring people, you're not telling them what to do, you're just adding a chapter to their story. So it comes in, it's like, okay, this is what I'm doing for you, and this is how it could augment your business. And so I loved it. So I left Boston in the late 1990s. I started a company down in Atlanta. And so for you entrepreneurs listening, if you think entrepreneurship is tough, go do it 900 miles away. And I had all my hair until then. But what we did is we built this company, 3 of us, grew it to 400 people. And we actually built our own video studio at the time. And this is when video production was a royal pain in the butt. But we wanted to interact with our customers. And if we couldn't be with them face to face, what we wanted is video as a way to supplement that. And our business took off because what we found is that people responded when we talked about projects and things like that. Yeah, it turned out to be great. And then fast forward, moved back to Boston. I just, sunny weather down in Atlanta, 80 degrees. That gets so boring. I needed to come back to Boston and experience sleet, in the month of January, and, jackets. So came back to Boston and, get involved in a company called Pixability, which was really geared toward, as tying in, helping small businesses tell their story.
And at the time, when you and I worked together, it was telling it through the tool of YouTube, which is still can be powerful.
Oh, extremely.
But there's so many other platforms now. There, you can do video through Facebook Lives, through Facebook Video, through Instagram, through is Vine still around? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, just video has become so powerful. How do you if you're talking to a storyteller who is whether they're an author, whether they're a business, just kind of dabbling in video, what would be one piece of advice you'd give to them, Rob, to say to start off if they're a little bit nervous, they don't really know where to go? What's one just kind of piece of advice, whether it's technical or just creative? What would you tell somebody?
Yeah, it's I had the fortune to co-author a book on YouTube several years ago. That was a fun exercise. But it wasn't just about talking about YouTube. We actually had to build it up in the book to talk about, you can't do YouTube until you accepted video. And, I told the readers, it's like, look, what are you waiting for? You think you're going to come out and be, Robert Redford or or Meryl Streep? No, they didn't start off really good right away. I said, just dive into it. It's probably what you experienced even with, what you're doing, Dan. It's, I'm sure this episode is far, far better than your first ones, although you probably had much more talented guests, than I. But, I tell people, jump in. What are you afraid of? It's kind of like, we've all seen the people at the swimming pool in the summertime, and they're walking around the pool. So what's the problem? Whoa, jump in the pool. And so that's kind of the attitude with video. Just, jump in. And you're going to make mistakes. And mistakes are encouraged. But remember, we as human beings learn from our mistakes. And that's a story in its own right. And as you do it more and more, you're going to find your sweet spot. You're going to find what you like and what you don't like. And that becomes, the whole thing.
And you've been beating that drum for years. So when people who are now going, well, video's the future, man, no, video's now. Like,
video,
get in.
Video is now. And, I'm just thinking there's the personal use of video. And, I'm a big fan of Netflix. And what Netflix is doing with some of their content, and I'll, not to give Netflix a plug, but we talked about sort of the food passion, and I love food videos that tell story. That's why, the passing of Anthony Bourdain, actually having grown up during that era in the restaurant business, broke many of our hearts. He told a great story, and last night it was like a 13-hour day yesterday. I got home and, I was toast. And my wife looked at me and she said, sit down. I got a good story for you. And she put on Ugly Delicious on Netflix. And she put on, it was actually commingled stories on pizza and pizza around the world. Now, if some of my friends watch this, I'm oftentimes accused of being a pizza snob. I'm not. I just have high standards for pizza. And we have a professional pizza oven at home. But it told the story of pizza through different eyes. And one of the most intriguing part is there's a guy in Tokyo who had a pizza joint, but it wasn't your usual, hey, let's put on some tomato sauce and some mozzarella. He was doing some Japanese ingredients, and he was telling his story because he got influenced he told the story of what happened in Italy and what influenced him. He brought it back to Japan and didn't replicate the Italy story, used that to create his own story. And then he interviewed a guy from Brooklyn who was brought to Tokyo to try this pizza, and this guy from Brooklyn had his own thing. And, and his story coming in, it's like, no, it's only this. And he ended up falling in love with a lot of the various different things around. Actually, the guy from Brooklyn they brought to Naples, and they brought a Seitan Sari it was crazy, to Tokyo. But it was an interwoven stories that were fabulous.
So our stories, it sounds like the people involved, their stories intersect, and that's what humans do, right? Our stories intersect.
I hope so.
So it's just, man, it's incredible, isn't it? I get goosebumps thinking about it.
Yeah, that's what makes life, that's what makes life great is when our stories intersect, and how oftentimes you'll be in a room, and one story ties into somebody else's story, and it's kind of like my dinner parties. Next thing you know, it's 2:00 in the morning, and we see that. We see that in business quite a bit too. When I'm brainstorming with the team, and I encourage I've been fortunate. The reason I think I've been, I've had some success with some terrific marketing campaigns is I hire people who can tell stories, whether they're in sales or whether they're in marketing or even engineering or customer service. I've had all of them. It's, and especially when it comes to marketing, it's because marketing is all about telling a story. Sales is about telling a story. And when I get people in the room, and I know I get storytellers, that suddenly they're giving me so much, on the board that we're able to build these amazing campaigns. And not only campaigns, and remember, as we said at the beginning, stories that are done right stick and they're memorable. I heard somebody today say, oh, you've got to do an advertising campaign and just keep beating people so they get it. It's like, no, give them a story. Not only you have to do it once, they fall in love with you.
And so you're talking about collaboration. How do you see it for yourself as a storyteller? I mean, you're obviously, Rob, a storyteller personally, by definition as an Italian. I think that's just part of your DNA.
That and food.
Food, right? But as a powerful storyteller, one who has that passion, one who's good at it, how did you find that balance between being a storyteller and being a story encourager and having others be a part of it? That has to be hard.
That's a great question, actually. I didn't give it much thought. It's the other thing too is storytelling is as much this as this. And we all know the person who doesn't shut up, the braggarts and things like that. Yeah, that's not storytelling. That's just horrible.
Right.
And
for those only listening, Rob's pointing to his ears. You have to listen.
Okay.
Right. I mean, you've got to be a listener. Yeah, that's awesome.
Exactly.
So go ahead. Yeah.
And for those of us who get high off of stories, we enjoy, probably listening to stories more than we do telling them. And, for me, as somebody driving collaboration, for me, I love it. So it wasn't as much of a challenge for me. And for folks that, maybe if you're a new manager or you're sort of getting into a role leading, it's get your team. My advice is listen, get the people telling stories and get high off of it. And you're going to have everything you need to do some great stuff. And those stories can come, you could say, well, it's your marketing group. But, Dan, let's give our example on how you and I met. It's we helped you tell your story. But the reason, we became friends is I learned about your business and I loved your story. And then we share our own personal stories. And every time we get together, we talk about our oyster story. For you listeners out there, let me tell you about Mr. Moyle here. He hadn't had oysters yet. So am I going to embarrass you?
No, not at all. Not at all.
I was going to bust your chops. So we went out and we went to this great place and this great restaurant, and we started basically ordering oysters, and we were having a terrific time. And so every time Dan comes to Boston, he now has oysters, and that's his story. And my story is my heart gets broken every time he comes to Boston and doesn't have oysters with me now. So.
Amen to that. Yeah. And I always tell our story when I do go to Boston. I've been there for the inbound conference a few times and quite a few times. And every time I go for oysters, whoever's with me, I say, okay, now listen, you've never had them. You have to try them in Boston, because I went out with my friend Rob and he talked to me about the flavor of this is from that area and this bluff. And I'm like, it blew my mind. And now I also only take everybody to a specific bakery for cannolis because I know exactly where to go and why. And when I try them other places, I'm like, how does this compare to modern? And man, my story, my love of Boston runs deep now because of our friendship and that food and those stories. Yeah. So that's incredible.
I'm going to get a cannoli. When I eat the cannoli, I'm going to think about the story. My parents first brought me to Modern. So Modern Pastry in the north end of Boston has been my family's shop. That my family's gone there for many, many years. And I remember the first time going there for trying to eat a cannoli when you're 3 years old, and you're trying to eat a cannoli, you end up with all over your face. And it was great. No, and that's the whole thing, Dan. It's fantastic. But you were also asking about some of the video aspects and where we are today. And there's, like everything else, video doesn't make a story. A story makes a video. And that's an important thing. I see a lot of people kind of jumping into video. Oh, video is going to be my path toward a story. No, you got to have your story first, and video is going to help you do amazing things with it.
So how does, excuse me, how does social media affect video, which affects story? Like how do you see all these different social media platforms having an impact on video? Video is so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And only because it's a good story, but video is a great tool. How does social media affect that? Does that chip away at the integrity? Does it build it up? What does it do for you?
It's a great question. When we look at, and where social media is excelled is stuff that would be lost in the noise are suddenly brought to the forefront. It could be something, it could be a social issue. It could be something else. And social brings it to the top. And oftentimes the accelerant in that process is going to be a video snippet. And because every so often we'll hear, and I hate the term viral video. It sets a bad expectation because everybody wants a viral video, and it's like, I want to win the lottery. But it's an accelerant, but ideally, for something to have hang time. So if it's just a short snippet of something, it's going to, be kind of famous, and it's going to disappear. Okay. And that's fine. But if social can use a snippet to get people to go back and actually hear the story itself, that becomes a really, really big deal. And so if maybe social video can actually lead to the real story, and whether it's audio or video, I see social as a means to an end. Okay. Not an end in itself.
Mm-hmm. And so I shouldn't say if you were, because you are at a startup right now. So as you're starting this new venture, where do you go to find that new audience? Do you do a ton of research ahead of time? Do you just kind of try things? Do you look at what's natural for you? How do you find that new audience?
That's a fantastic question. For me, so the new venture, we're in the sports video business, and if I tell you too much, I'll have to kill you, and I don't want to do that. I'm not ready to go to jail. But in sports is the ultimate story platform, and for me, my partner is a former NFL player, and the genesis as we were teaming up, his name is Paul Zakowskis. He's a great guy. And, he came to me with a story. He's a All-American football player, and he played for the Browns, and he had all of his video content in his basement, and he had a flood in his basement because he had a house on Cape Cod, and he pretty much lost his story. He lost his history. And so that was the genesis of the two of us teaming up. To create this new venture. And it's all around our new venture. What I can share is all around, sports storytelling through video. And, because we tend to look at sports not as stories, we look at sports as events. And whether you're an athlete or whether you're a fan of a team, and this is the beauty of some of the stuff that we're getting into, because what I'm building with Paul is a story business, and it's a video story business. But whether it's going to be and I'll ask you, there has to be a sporting event in your history that you can tell a story around that impacted you personally, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, just this week I was at a camp with a bunch of guys for our church, for our youth group, and my co-counselor and I were talking about football stories from our youth with these middle schoolers, encouraging them and talking. And it took me right back to that moment in that football game. And oh yeah, man, sports stories can be huge.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I think one of my most memorable moments, and for those of you listeners or you viewers who have this perception of Boston, everybody thinks we're these psychotic, spoiled baby sports fans. Okay. We're not. Okay. We're passionate. But, we did have our drought years, and I'm sure drought years will return. Although the Red Sox are doing really good right now.
Good.
But, even one of my stories, and I'll share it. It's back in the old, we'd have paper routes. And this is when little kids actually rode around with a bike and threw papers, and, you could actually make money. And we would spend our money on sports tickets, whether it was going to be for the Bruins or the Celtics. And I really, really liked, the Bruins. And so what I would do is I would take my money, and you're not making a whole lot of money from the various things. I would take my money and I would buy the worst seats at the old Boston Garden. And then, and we've all done this. And Dan, if you haven't done this, you're lying to me. So, you get the worst seats, and yeah, you're kind of watching the game, but you're also scoping out who didn't show up, who had the good seats. And this is before all the ushers kept you away from that stuff. So I would always try to get, so my story is, there was one game, and I never had an interaction with a professional athlete. And so I'm watching with my buddies. We get down to, we're behind the Bruins bench. And there was a player, number 8, Ken Hodge for the Bruins. And I was so excited to be behind the bench that I said, "Hey, Ken." And he actually turned around, looked at me, and smiled. Okay. And here it is, how many decades later, I'm telling the story. I'm getting goosebumps, but it's all tied to sports, and sports is such a great, sports is great. We talked about food and stories, but sports and stories is just as great. Whether you participated, whether you've turned around and you viewed, or whether you've done all of the above, and that's what's exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. All right, so hey, Ken. Yeah, we've got a hockey. I love hockey. So when you're talking, hockey's my language, man. Baseball's fun to go watch, but hockey is life. And Red Wings are my team, but we also have a team in Kalamazoo called the Kalamazoo Wings. They used to be part of the Red Wings organization. They're not now, but yeah, I remember going to games with my dad, and I can remember being during the intermission after there was a hockey fight and everything else, and everybody's drinking beer, and it's just this rough and tumble blue collar hometown hockey team. Mm-hmm. And we're sitting out in the concourse where it was still smoking, and the walls are sticky, and there's just masses of people, and people are smoking, and we'd see, my dad would see somebody he knew, and I can smell it and feel it, and man, I love it.
That's what the story's doing to you. Yeah. It's all the senses come back to life, and it's an amazing thing.
It is.
And it also, stories just don't, come and go. They actually impact your life, and they leave an imprint. I think they leave an imprint on the soul.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And if we can, and as storytellers, then professionally, if we can tap into that, and video does it so well, the video, because it's not just visual, it's video, it's narrator, it's audio, it's the way things do, there's so much in video that impacts us and brings us back. We don't make buying decisions based on logic. We make it on emotion. Mm-hmm. And we might justify it later with logic, maybe, but it's that emotional connection. And so if we can do that through video, it's huge.
Yeah. So we do like to couple logic with emotion, and that's the powerful mix. And we strive for that, but it's the emotional element. It's pulling on the strings. Yeah. That becomes such a big deal.
And so speaking of pulling on strings, Rob, I want to get to this next thing for you, because I know you've got a side hustle, a side project, a side passion, not really a hustle, but a passion, the electric project.
Yes.
I want to hear a little bit about that and how story plays a part in that.
This is really, and this is a passion of mine. It started 11 years ago, and I'll tell the story. I had been, again, so many people know me as marketer, sales guy, or, entrepreneur, but at the end of the day, I'm really a geek. And I came up, and I was fortunate. I had some great teams over the years in tech, and I was running engineering teams. And I always, encourage people to do amazing things that help them grow, and people had great careers. And as I moved on, about 11 years ago, my phone rang, and it was a very talented engineer who used to work for me. and he got laid off. And he got laid off from his job. And so he said, he's like, Rob, can we get together? And so we got together, and you get to know the people. By the way, with your team and with the people who work for you, if you know their stories, you will remember them. And that's really, really important, is know the stories of the people who work for you and the people around you and your friends, and you'll never forget people. And, I had enough crazy stories that they remember me. So I got together, and it was just, it was really sad, because what happened is, I think as human beings, if life is good, somebody's drawing a good salary, they're working for a decent company, they think it's a stable job, a lot of people, especially older workers, and especially older tech workers, and this isn't everything. So if you're in tech, you're automatically immune to everything. You're not. And so older tech workers were losing their jobs, and they were coming to me and they're saying, well, what do we do? And so we kind of sat down, and they kind of forgot their own narrative. They forgot their own story and what got them there and what made them, incredible engineers. And so, with the electric project, and we're in the process, I've kind of, it's kind of on hold right now because of the requirements of the new venture, even though I do a little bit on the side when I can. It's helping them, relive their story. And by reliving their story, it reinvigorates their passion for learning new things. Because a lot of these people who end up getting displaced, they had this skill set, and then the market skill set kind of went this way. And so once they get that story, we kind of bring them along and retrain them. And this is also true not just for displaced workers. This is true for, and I've worked a lot with moms who, very, very talented women who chose to raise the children and are looking to get back in the workforce, and they're having a tough time. And it's the same thing all over again. And, even with some of the vets that I've worked with, people that you're just looking to get into, vets or students or people looking to get into the workforce, what's your story, and let's relate it to how we can get it in. So, ultimately for me, we have so many talented people, not only in, where I am in New England, all around the country and all around the world. And there are so many people that aren't, plugged in. The whole concept of the electric project is I feel that everybody's electric. And at some point, and this happens to all of us, somebody, for some reason, the plug gets pulled. And our goal is to use stories to help them plug back in, recharge, light up again, and get back. And I'll tell you the best, a friend of mine he'd been out for quite a while. He came to me, and we spent a good deal of time together. And a few weeks ago, he ended up getting a job, and he had a great story to tell. And his excitement was just, when he called me up and said, Rob, I nailed it. I couldn't have been happier. And that was great. So I think for all of us, the challenge for all of us, especially in trying times sometimes, it's like, let's know each other's stories, and let's help one another. And, let's all get the stories tied together. Mm-hmm.
As always, the time goes way too fast. I want to ask you my big BHAG, my big hairy audacious goal question. And I know it's theoretical because you could never stop telling stories. Again, it's in your DNA, brother. If you could only tell one last story, whether it's professionally or personally, and be done telling stories, what would be your last story that you told?
The last story that I told, that's a really tough one because there are so many. But what I'll tell is, I'm going to tell it. I've been fortunate. I've been married to the same woman for a long time, and she's an amazing friend. And the stories that I tell quite frequently, because people say, well, how have you been married so long? And what I don't like is everybody says, well, your wife should be a saint being married to you for that long. Dan, I don't think I was that bad. But the story that I would tell is it's tied to when we were dating. And the story would be, and this kind of rings true. So I was living in New Hampshire, and Laura was living down just outside of Boston. And when we were dating, we would try to do stuff on the weekends. And she would come up to Nashua, and where I was living, Nashua, New Hampshire, and she would always show up with a box of donuts. And so the door would knock, because we'd have like a whole Saturday plan of stuff to do. And, so there'd be the knock at the door, and there's Laura with the big brown eyes and the smile, and a box of donuts. And, we'd sit down and we'd plan our day. And every single day we made it a journey. And we'd go and discover something that we didn't discover. And we'd come back and we'd cook together. And just like we talked about earlier, we determine what to cook, and we do it together. And it was always that level of collaboration. So the story is always about, the impact that Laura had on me was based on, her kind of joining the journey and having her story, tying it and weaving our stories early on. And we realized that the two stories together are absolute harmony. So, and I think, so my story is joining the story with somebody that I care about. And for everybody out there, it's, think about it. And, I've had friends that, have had some challenges with relationships and things like that. And, I guess the takeaway is make sure put the stories back together. And that can be a lot of fun. Really tough question, Dan.
You're such a romantic guy at heart, aren't you?
That's the Italian thing.
I love it.
We love our food. We love our romance. And we're amazing. And maybe on the next podcast, I'll sing for you.
There you go. Hey, we'll do a singing podcast. I won't sing. Everybody's welcome. You don't want me to sing, but I love it, Rob, man. Thank you so much, brother. Listen, if people want to connect with you, what's the easiest way to do so? Is there one place?
Yeah, you can find me. For those of you professionally, I'm on LinkedIn, Rob Ciampa. It's spelled Ciampa. And you can hit me up. There's it's a little bit dated, but I have a website. I'll be writing more. I've been so busy with the startup that I kind of let my writing lapse. I love writing. So Ciampa.com, Ciampa.com, and there'll be links to places like the Electric Project there as well. So yeah, it's I told my wife recently, it's like, I got to get my writing stuff back, because what's writing? It's telling a story.
Absolutely. Awesome, man. Thanks for your time today. It was absolutely incredible.
Dan, I love you. I miss you, buddy. Oysters next time, and great job. And your passion is everybody has it. Everybody who comes in contact with you, you can't help but get it. So thank you for all you're doing, my friend.
So once again, thank you so much to my guest, Rob Ciampa. Be sure to visit Rob online. You can find those links in the show notes. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it all over the place. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, email, text it. Call somebody up and say, hey, I heard of this podcast. You're out camping, telling stories around the campfire. Tell somebody. Thank you so much. Anywhere you can share it with other storytellers is always helpful. And please consider leaving us a review if you enjoyed it. In fact, this review from Mark Lineberry is fitting, because he's co-host of a great podcast about running with your significant other. So much like cooking with them, it can be a great connection for you. So Mark says, Dan assembled a great guest list of impactful storytellers. Each of their episodes are filled with great tips and info. Whether you're looking for a great podcast for stories or looking to transform your storytelling for your next talk or interview, you found the right place. Check this podcast out. Thank you so much, Mark. And listeners, be sure to check out Mark's show, The Running Couple Podcast. And I never really thought about the Storytellers Network as an inspiring podcast to help you tell a better story for your interview or your own talk. That's a great thing too. So maybe I have to get some people who are public speakers on to be able to help you tell your story better that way too. So there you go. So thanks again, Mark. Thanks, listeners, for sticking through all the way to the end. And thank you again to Rob Ciampa. What an incredible conversation that was. So hey, until next time, here's to telling our stories and having those stories to tell. Cheers.